Welcome back to the Dancing Toaster. This is Nelly, and usually you'd be hearing some music right now and be a creepy story preparing you to deal with the intersection of faith and the paranormal. Well, today's going to be a little bit different. Got some stuff going on personally and church-wise that got to focus on this week, but I didn't want you to go without a show. Thursday is my birthday, but you get the present this month. I was going to release it on Thursday, but I figure why not today when you're expecting something to come out anyway. So today you're going to be hearing, get a little taste of the member-exclusive content over on my Patreon. Yes, I'm trying to create some FOMO for the stuff going on over there. There's a member-exclusive show that I do called The Man-Eating Toaster, where I deal with cults and true crimey things. So what you're going to hear today is part one of my deep dive on Heaven's Gate. And if as soon as you hear that, you're like, oh man, that's not what I signed up for. Well, the shocking thing about cults and stuff like that is there's a lot more overlap with some of the Dancing Toaster stuff, whether you believe it or not. I mean, this was a cult that believed that aliens were going to come and take them home. So don't tune out, check it out, and if you like it, head over to the Patreon where there's going to be a lot more of it. We're already 4 episodes deep into the Man-Eating Toaster, which, again, just under the umbrella of the Dancing Toaster. So I apologize for the lack of new content for my patrons. Not switching everything over or anything like that. Just trying to create some FOMO, get people excited about what we're doing over there on the Patreon. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy the Man-Eating Toaster. I didn't want you to go a whole week without anything, and this is my gift to you, and I hope you enjoy it, and I hope to see you over there on the Patreon. So I love you. I'm not quite out, but some new music's about to come in.
Flight crew, please prepare for takeoff. Activation code required. Scanning. Login authorized. Evacuation sequence activated. Accessing archives.
911, what is your emergency?
Suspect is armed.
Self-destruction. Unable to comply.
Officers are on the scene. In pursuit of suspect, west on Hall Road.
Synchronizing. 80%.
Hey, come on!
Engage. Dust to dust.
July 23rd, 1995. The desert night was vast and endless, the kind of darkness that makes a man feel small, like just another speck in an infinite universe. Alan Hale stood in his driveway in New Mexico, surrounded by silence. He had spent years studying the sky, memorizing the celestial bodies that hung like ancient lanterns in the void. He wasn't looking for anything new that night, just another routine session, another evening lost in the constellations, until something caught his eye. A bright, unfamiliar blur moving against the blackness, cutting through the heavens like a silent omen. He double-checked his star maps, scanning for anything that could explain the anomaly. Nothing matched. It was uncharted, unknown, a discovery. Heart-pounding, Alan rushed inside to fire off an email to the Central Bureau for Astronomical Telegrams, the organization responsible for verifying new celestial events. Alan needed confirmation. He needed to know if he had truly found something that had never been seen before. At that same moment, hundreds of miles away in the Arizona desert, another man was staring at the same sky. Thomas Popp wasn't a professional astronomer. He didn't even own a telescope. He was just an amateur, out for a casual stargazing trip with friends. But as he leaned over his friend's homemade telescope, he too saw it. The same glowing object, drifting like a phantom through the Sagittarius constellation. Excited, Thomas reached for his phone to call the bureau and report what he had seen, only to realize he had no service. Stuck in the desert, all he could do was wait. Hours later, when he finally got home and made the call, Alan Hale had already reported it. but the Bureau wasn't sure who had seen it first, so both men were credited for the discovery. The comet would bear both names, Hale-Bopp. For Alan and Thomas, it was a moment of triumph. Discovering a new comet was astronomically rare, something that happened maybe once in a lifetime. Their names would be written in history, forever tied to one of the brightest and longest visible comets to ever strike across the Earth's sky. But for Thomas Bopp, that fame would come at a terrible cost. As the comet reached its peak brightness in 1997, becoming visible even in light-polluted cities, Thomas's brother and sister-in-law decided to drive out to the desert for one last look. They set up their camera, trying to capture the cosmic marvel before it vanished for another 2,300 years. They never got the chance. A speeding vehicle came out of nowhere, striking them both, killing them instantly. For Thomas, what should have been the greatest moment of his life was now haunted by death. But even that tragedy paled in comparison to what was happening on the other side of the country. Because while Thomas mourned the loss of his family, a group of people in California stared at the same comet and saw something entirely different. They didn't see a natural wonder. They saw a supernatural sign, a vessel, a doorway. For the past 2 decades, they'd been waiting for their salvation, watching, believing, obeying. And now, as the Hale-Bopp comet burned across the night sky, their leader told them that their time had come. March 21st, 1997. The waitress at Marie Callender's had no idea that she was serving a Last Supper at her largest table that night. 39 people dressed identically and peculiarly, their clothes crisp, their hair neatly combed with the same style. They moved with the same quiet precision, almost mechanical in their mannerisms, standing and sitting at the same time, placing their napkins the same way and in their laps in near perfect unison. They were polite, overly so, no small talk, no laughter, just quiet nods and murmured thanks as they each ordered the exact same meal. Iced tea, salad with vinaigrette dressing, turkey pot pie, and a piece of blueberry cheesecake. As the waitress walked back toward the kitchen, she glanced over her shoulder. Something about them unsettled her. The way they sat perfectly upright, their expressions serene yet distant and vacant, like they weren't really there. She tried to shake the feeling as she refilled drinks and cleared plates. While observing the group, she noticed something else. No one reached for their phones. No one checked the time. No one fidgeted. They weren't killing time like normal customers. They were savoring it. The clinking of forks and knives was the only soundtrack to this strange supper. They chewed slowly, methodically, tasting every bite as if it were the last meal they would ever have. Little did she know that it was. When the plates were cleared and the bill was paid, they stood up in unison like a well-rehearsed chorus line. They left a generous tip, not too much, not too little, just enough to be polite and just enough to avoid drawing attention. And then, one by one, they filed out into the cool California night. The waitress would later remember the moment the door shut behind them. She didn't know why at the time, but she shivered. She never saw them again. By the time she came back for her next shift, the news would spread. They were already gone. Long gone. March 26, 1997. Deputy Robert Brunk had been with the San Diego Sheriff's Department for over a decade. In that time, he had seen things. Terrible things. Fires, murder scenes, drug dens, the kind of horrors that haunted and hardened even the most seasoned officers. But nothing, not war, not blood, not death, had ever prepared him for what he was about to find inside the $1.6 million mansion in Rancho Santa Fe. It was just after 3:30 p.m. when the call came in. An anonymous tip. A quiet, monotone voice on the other end of the line.
Yeah, I need to report an anonymous tip. This is regarding a mass suicide.
The dispatcher asked for more details, but the caller had already hung up. Brunk had been in the area, so he was the first to respond. A wellness check. That's all it was supposed to be. No sirens, no urgency. Just a simple knock on the door to make sure everything was all right. So he thought. He pulled into the long, winding driveway, his squad car crunching over the gravel. The house, more like a small estate, was eerily silent. No movement. No signs of life. He walked up to the front door, rapped his knuckles against the wood. No answer. He tried the side door. Unlocked. He was in. He called out as he stepped inside.
Sheriff's Department? Anyone home?
Still nothing. And then he smelled it. The unmistakable, sickening stench of death. Brunk had smelled it before, on crime scenes, on bodies left too long in the sun. The kind of smell no human being can forget. But this was different. Stronger. Heavier. The kind of smell that sinks into your clothes, your skin, even your brain. He reached for his radio, but he stopped himself. First he needed to see. He moved deeper into the house, his boots silent against the plush carpet. That's when he saw the first one. A figure lying on a bed, covered in a purple cloth. Hands folded neatly at the sides. Then another, and another, and another. He moved down the hallway, stepping into what looked like a dormitory. Bunk beds lined the walls, each one occupied, every body identical. Neatly dressed in black sweatpants and black shirts. Black and white Nike decades, perfectly aligned on each foot. Beneath the plastic bags were heads. The skin beneath pale and waxy, lips tinged blue. Each person had the same contents in their pockets. $5.75. 39 beds. 39 bodies. 39 people who had calmly and methodically laid down and died. Brunk's stomach twisted violently. He forced himself to breathe through his mouth, blinking against the burning in his eyes. This wasn't a crime scene. This was a graveyard. And it was planned, organized, ritualistic. He finally reached for his radio, pressing the button with an unsteady hand.
Hey, dispatch, I need backup. We got a situation here. Multiple deceased.
He paused. Then the dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker.
Multiple as in how many?
Brunk turned in a small circle, taking in the sheer scale of it all. The smell, the quiet, the eerie stillness. The purple shrouds gently placed like a final farewell. He swallowed hard.
39.
Another pause. Disbelief.
Say again?
Brunk closed his eyes, took a steadying breath, and repeated himself.
Yeah, 39 deceased. I need all available units here now.
He stepped back, turning toward the open door, desperate for a lungful of fresh air. But as he did, his eyes caught something. A small, handwritten sign taped to the doorframe. A final message. It read, "We have gone to the next level." The night before, each one had willingly ingested a lethal cocktail of phenobarbital, applesauce, and vodka before suffocating themselves with plastic bags. They called themselves Heaven's Gate, and that night they believed they were graduating from the earth. When news of a mass suicide broke, it sent shockwaves not just across California, but across the nation. Marshall Applewhite, their leader, with wild, bulging eyes, had led his followers to believe that a spaceship hidden behind the Hale-Bopp comet was coming to take them to the next level, as he called it. It sounded like something out of a bad science fiction novel, but this wasn't fiction. 39 real people abandoned their lives, their families, and their own autonomy for the promise of an intergalactic salvation. And the scariest part? Most of them weren't brainwashed nobodies. They weren't the lost and confused drifters that society likes to imagine when it thinks of cults. No. They were intelligent, educated men and women, people with careers, engineers, teachers, nurses, and they all willingly ended their own lives over the course of 3 days, from March 22nd to March 24th. March 22nd, the first group of 15 took their own lives. March 23rd, the next group of 15 more followed. Then on the 24th, the final remaining 9, including Marshall Applewhite himself, died. Marshall was one of the last to die alongside 2 other members who helped arrange the bodies before taking their own. Why? How did this happen? How had Marshall convinced them that salvation was found in the stars? How did that belief in such salvation turn into mass death? How does a cult leader gain that much control? And most importantly, was this really suicide at all? Or was it all something far darker? Welcome, my toasties, to the brand new show. Fans of the Dancing Toaster, this is the Man-Eating Toaster. I'm, of course, Nelly, but you know that by now. And these episodes are going to be darker than what you're used to, if you haven't noticed already. In many episodes of the Dancing Toaster, we speak of monsters that may or may not be. Monsters that in many cases, though they strike fear, don't actually strike out. They rarely take lives. On the Man-Eating Toaster, we'll be talking about monsters that are very real. There is no question as to whether or not they existed, but there are hundreds of questions about who they are, what they did, and ultimately why they did what they did. Now, before talking about Marshall Applewhite and the infamous Heaven's Gate cult, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the name of the show. For those unaware, both the Dancing Toaster and the Man-Eating Toaster are Ghostbusters references from the exact same scene from Ghostbusters 2, in fact. Ray and Egon are running multiple tests using that pink slime stuff, and Egon grabs the toaster. He brings it over to the pool table. Ray puts some of that pink slime inside, saying, "It responds to music." Egon eventually says, "Oh, it loves Jackie Wilson." The toaster starts dancing around. Boom, the dancing toaster. You know that part. But then Dr. Venkman, my favorite, runs over to the toaster and says, oh baby, you're my favorite #1 Christmas boutique gift item." Winston chimes in saying, "Right, and the first time somebody gets mad, the toaster could eat their hand." Venkman rebuts, No, we put a warning label on it, we don't have any liability." Then he sticks his hand inside and he starts screaming, ah. They rush to his aid to get the toaster off his hand, and he says, Oh, did you ever go for it? The old man-eating toaster gig. They all proceed to tackle him, and I never get tired of watching the scene. I know this isn't a paranormal show like the Dancing Toaster, which wrestles with the intersection of faith and the paranormal, but there are plenty of connecting tissues. I'm starting with Heaven's Gate because Marshall Applewhite and his followers believed in aliens. They were a UFO cult that believed with every fiber of their being that beings from another planet were coming to rescue them from their mundane existence on planet Earth. This show, this case in particular, serves as a reminder that beliefs matter. Beliefs have real consequences, and for 39 people between March 22nd and March 24th, 1997, those consequences were dire and they were permanent. Now, I warned you the show will be dark. Some episodes more than others, but something else that might be dark is my sense of humor. I'm just being honest. I mean no disrespect, but the show is intended to intrigue, entertain, and educate. If you've listened to me enough, you know I'm not really worried about being politically correct. I won't hold back a whole lot. I pray you're not easily offended. I know that these were real people, so I will attempt to be as tasteful as I can, but I have no respect for the leaders like the Fruit Loop Marshall Applewhite that helped bring these poor souls to hell with him. So buckle up, it's going to be a bumpy ride through Heaven's Gate. I've always had a morbid fascination with cults. Prior to my path of ministry, I was contemplating going into psychology. The mind is a complex thing, and it's hard to fathom how some could lose theirs and follow somebody like Applewhite. I'm curious about how these cult leaders exert power over individuals and strategically manipulate and brainwash them into believing some of the most outrageous things. Full disclosure, I have some uncomfortable first-hand experience. I initially got saved in a Baptist church, but in my zeal and in my immaturity, I jumped ship and started going to my best friend's hyper-charismatic, hyper-Pentecostal church, and it was nuts. At first, I confused their zeal with God's presence. I was a baby Christian, a new Christian. Everybody was running around, falling out, hooting and hollering. "I got a Suzuki, shut about a Honda." The so-called pastor would constantly go well into 2-hour territory with his messages and make you feel guilty if you looked at your watch because you were starving. This hyper-charismatic church was obsessed with your money and obsessed with health and wealth and all that prosperity gospel dribble. But again, I didn't know any better. They would guilt you and force you into every single event, every single ministry. More of your money, more of your time, more and more outrageous claims, making more and more outrageous demands. I almost walked away from the Lord entirely until His Spirit spoke to my heart in a way that only He can do and told me to open His Word. I thought to myself, isn't that what this false prophet and prophetess are doing every week? And He convinced me I needed to go into His Word for myself. So I did. John 8:32 declares, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free."
I began to read and study more and with every question I asked, they got more and more upset with me and attempted to tighten their grip around my neck and around my life. They said absurd things like, "We're the prophets, we're the mouthpieces of God, you're too young to hear from God." I still didn't know a whole bunch, but I knew enough to know that I had to get out of there, so I did. They weren't a full-blown cult, but friends, they were dangerously closer than I ever wanted to be. I share that with you not only to be vulnerable, but so that you can see I'm not checking my heart at the door before going into these topics. I got a lot closer to drinking the Kool-Aid than I ever expected, so I'm sympathetic. My heart breaks for those deceived. Research suggests that cults often emerge during periods of societal upheaval. In times of uncertainty, they can provide a deceptive sense of structure, support, and belonging. This may explain why so many of them gained traction in the 1960s and 1970s, a time when young people were searching for direction amidst the turbulence of the Vietnam War, the Cold War, economic struggles of all kinds, among other things. Some cults that emerged during this era were particularly disturbing and will most likely be covered in future episodes. The infamous Manson family carried out brutal murders. People's Temple is where the whole "drink the Kool-Aid" phrase came from with Jim Jones. The Process Church of the Final Judgment was a bizarre mix of Scientology, Christianity, Satanism, and apocalyptic prophecy, promoting a strange doctrine that reconciled Christ and Satan. You also had Synanon and the Rajneesh movement, among others. Sadly, we'll have no shortage of content for the show. Heaven's Gate initially seemed less menacing. It combined elements of Christianity, ufology, and New Age thought, believing they could ascend to a higher existence by leaving their earthly vehicles, what they called bodies. Their focus on UFOs and extraterrestrial salvation appeared more eccentric than dangerous. For nearly 22 years, the group operated without any major incidents. So how did it happen? How did a seemingly harmless group transform into one of the most infamous and deadly cults in modern history? While many view the deaths of all 39 Heaven's Gate members as a collective suicide, some argue that only one person took their own life, while 38 others were victims of manipulation and coercion. This is the story of how one man's descent into delusion and control led to the tragic end of his vulnerable followers. Marshall Herff Applewhite Jr. was born on May 17, 1931, in Spur, Texas. Why did it have to be Texas? He was born to parents Marshall Applewhite Sr. and Louise Applewhite. His upbringing was deeply rooted in strict religious values, as his father was a conservative Presbyterian minister. Despite their rigid beliefs, his parents were known to be warm and loving, and Marshall shared a particularly strong bond with his father. From an early age, Marshall displayed exceptional intelligence and talent. Though he excelled academically, his true passion lay in music. He was especially drawn to the piano and organ, an interest likely influenced by his mother, who played piano at church. Actively involved in the choir, he frequently performed solo pieces for the congregation, showcasing both his vocal ability and his deep connection to music. Marshall completed high school in 1948 before enrolling at Austin College in Sherman, Texas, where he pursued a degree in philosophy. During his time there, he married his high school sweetheart, Ann Pierce, and the couple later welcomed 2 children, Mark and Lane. Initially, Marshall aspired to follow in his father's footsteps and become a minister. He enrolled in seminary school to study religion and theology, but he soon realized that his true passion lay elsewhere, specifically in music. Feeling unfulfilled in his theological studies, he made the decision to leave seminary and instead accepted a position as a music director at a Presbyterian church in North Carolina. Marshall thrived in this role, finding joy and purpose in his work. However, in 1954, his life took an unexpected turn when he was drafted into the U.S. Army. Over the next 2 years, he served in both Austria and New Mexico before being honorably discharged in 1956. After completing his military service, Marshall relocated with his family to Colorado, where he pursued a master's degree in musical theater. Immersing himself in the world of performance, he became involved in local theater productions, seemingly finding his true passion. However, his restless ambition soon led him to make another significant move, this time to Alabama in 1960. In Alabama, Marshall landed what appeared to be his dream job, teaching chorus at the University of Alabama. This position aligned perfectly with his love for music and education, offering both stability and a sense of purpose. Up to this point, his life had been fairly conventional. Apart from his military service, he had navigated various career paths, frequently relocating but maintaining a stable home life. He was regarded as a dedicated husband, a loving father, deeply devoted to his wife Anne and their children. However, there was a part of himself that he had long kept secret, one that would soon unravel everything that he had built. In 1965, university officials discovered that he had been involved in an affair with a male student. The revelation was scandalous, especially in the Deep South, and it cost him his job. But the repercussions didn't end there. When his wife Anne learned of the affair, she found it impossible to move past the perversion and betrayal. Whether Marshall sought to salvage their marriage or had already resigned himself to its fate remains unclear. Either way, the discovery marked the end of their relationship. Anne not only filed for divorce, but she also took full custody of their children, severing his ties to them entirely. Now without a job, his marriage in ruins, and his reputation in tatters, Marshall had little choice but to return home to Texas. However, going back meant facing perhaps an even greater challenge, explaining everything to his Christian parents. Remember, his father was a strict Presbyterian minister, back when the Presbyterian Church still believed and taught the Bible and what it says about sexuality. If you're a Presbyterian, I mean no offense, but mainline Presbyterianism, the PCUSA, has officially lost the plot. It started in 2011. The PCUSA voted to allow the ordination of openly gay and lesbian clergy. Then in 2015, the denomination changed its definition of marriage to be between two people instead of between a man and a woman, officially allowing same-sex marriages in opposition to what the Bible clearly teaches on the matter. I know that there are some resistance movements within the Presbyterian Church, the PCA, the OPC. In any case, I pray sanity and biblical belief win the day in the denomination, though right now it's still not looking good. Woke insanity and third-wave feministic rot has crept in the PCUSA, promoting the use of idiotic gender-neutral language, avoiding masculine terms like father for God or mankind for humanity. Some PCUSA leaders downplay the exclusivity of Christ, suggesting that people of other religions can be saved without faith in Jesus. This is evil. In 2014, a PCUSA assembly removed a hymn from its hymnal because it referred to Jesus' death as satisfying God's wrath, rejecting the doctrine of penal substitutionary atonement. And the icing on this abomination of a cake? The PCUSA is pro-abortion, and many of their churches actually give money to Planned Parenthood. Look, if you're in a Presbyterian church, again, I pray it's one that has remained faithful to God and to His Word, and I hope the PCUSA continues to crumble like Babylon or repent. You probably won't hear any of that on any cult or true crime channel or podcast. Every time I listen to a documentary or video on Marshall or Heaven's Gate, this is the part where they say insane things like,
"If Marshall's daddy would have supported his gay son, maybe things wouldn't have unfolded the way they did."
Shut up. Miss me with that, please. If that's how you feel, you probably won't like the rest of this. Where were we? Oh yeah, Marshall's heading to Texas to tell good old dad that he cheated on his wife with a male student and now has lost everything. Again, this is the part where every woke YouTuber says,
"How dare they shun him? They should have accepted him."
so forget the wife and kids he betrayed, right? Forget the abuse of power, sleeping with a student. This was wrong for more reasons than the gay stuff, but the gay stuff sure didn't help. Marshall's parents were embarrassed and devastated. They did cut off communication with him. Now, the question always comes up, was this the right thing to do? Well, biblically, his father should have asked him, "Are you a Christian or not?" If Marshall said yes, then he should have called him to repentance and reconciliation. He may not have been able to get right with his wife or his kids or a former employer, but he could have gotten right with God. If he refused to repent, Marshall's dad was totally in the right, telling his adult son, "You can't call yourself a Christian and remain in unrepentant sin." I want you to listen to what Paul told his son in the faith, Timothy. 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 to 5. "But understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty. For people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving God, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness, but denying its power. Avoid such people." Many are in agreement up until you get to the end of verse 5 when Paul says to avoid religious hypocrites like those of the PCUSA. Is this a one-off? Is this the only time Paul said something like this? Well, Romans 16, 17 and 18. Now I urge you, brothers, to watch out for those who create divisions and obstacles that are contrary to the teaching you have learned. Turn away from them. For such people are not serving our Lord Christ, but their own appetites. By smooth talk and flattery they deceive the hearts of the naive. These are some of the same passages that warn of the type of man Marshall will become. Here's another one for you, Ephesians 5, 1-8. Therefore be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. But sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you, as is proper among saints. Let there be no filthiness, nor foolish talk, nor crude joking, which are out of place, but instead let there be thanksgiving. For you may be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure, or who is covetous, that is an idolater, has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore do not become partners with them. For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. As children of the light, we are to distance ourselves from the unrepentant pretenders walking in darkness. My son comes home and says, "Dad, I did this." If he's willing to repent, I'll work with every fiber in my being to help him walk in righteousness. If he says some nonsense about,
Oh, well, I think it's okay for me to be a Christian and live this way.
I'd say, I love you, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. It would kill me inside, but I love God more. I refuse to judge Marshall's parents. 1, I don't even know them. 2, biblically, they may have done the right thing. We don't have all the details. Now, maybe they didn't do it the right way. Again, I don't know. But what I will never say is,
Oh, poor Marshall, if Daddy would have said he could be gay, there'd be no UFO cult and no deaths.
miss me with that nonsense. We don't know that. Anyone who says that doesn't know that. And once you're willing to accept one form of perversion, it's only a matter of time before you open the gates for other immoral, insane notions, as we've clearly seen over the last 10 years. First it was just the gay stuff, then it was the transgender nonsense, where now people are not only ignoring the Bible, but also thousands of years of biology. So Marshall. Despite the turmoil and the scandal, Marshall managed to land another teaching position. He was hired as a music professor at the University of St. Thomas, a private Catholic college in Texas. It was a chance to start over, to reclaim some stability in his life. At the same time, he found joy in performing with the Houston Grand Opera, an opportunity that reignited his passion for music and for the stage. He was even cast in a leading role for an upcoming production, something that gave him a renewed sense of purpose. For a moment, it seemed like he was on the path to rebuilding his life. But just as before, his past perverse patterns resurfaced. Once again, Marshall became involved in an inappropriate relationship with another male student. When the university's administration discovered the affair, he was forced to resign from here. His downward spiral accelerated. With his life and career in ruins, Marshall sought help from a psychiatrist. I'm not going to judge him for seeking help. I hate that he lost his family and his jobs, but let's not pretend he didn't do this to himself. It was his pursuit of perversion and pleasure that destroyed him. His psychiatrist, after evaluating his condition, advised him to step away from the opera role, believing he was in no emotional state to handle the pressure of performing. With no job, no performance, and no clear future, the weight of failure pressed down on him like never before. Many say that Marshall blamed his sexuality for his downfall, convinced that it had cost him everything: his wife, his children, his career, his place in the world. It was Marshall's sin that led to his downfall. He grew up knowing the truth, and he turned away from it and pursued illicit desires. I've known straight men that had affairs and lost it all as well. They don't get to blame their sexuality any more than Marshall. Sexuality is a fire. Fire can be productive and destructive. It can cook a chicken and it can burn a house down. When fire is used properly, say for example in a fireplace, it can burn as hot as it wants and can be useful and pleasurable, providing warmth, cooking food, etc. But if you use the fire however you want, say you want to start a fire, on your dining table. I mean, you can, but I wouldn't recommend it. At best, you lose your table. At worst, you lose your home, maybe even your life. Heterosexual marriage between one man and one woman is the fireplace. The fire of sexuality can safely burn there. Adultery, fornication, homosexuality, these are all attempts to use the fire in inappropriate ways, and it always leads to destruction. Even if Marshall had been with women instead of men, he was spitting in the face of his wife, whom he committed to, and multiple times spat in the face of God, who created sex and sexuality and gets to decide how they are to be used and utilized and enjoyed. One by one, the pillars of his life crumbled, bulldozed by his own hands. He had lost his family. His father, once his greatest role model, had rejected him, which would be totally wrong if Marshall had agreed to repent and get right with the Lord. And all of his professional aspirations were slipping further out of reach. A former acquaintance, someone who had shared a fleeting, intimate relationship with him, another sign of his unwillingness to do the right thing, later recalled how Marshall often expressed a longing for something different. He told this friend he wanted a platonic bond, free from the complications that had repeatedly unraveled his life. He continued to see sex and sexuality as the problem, when it was illicit desires that were the problem. Again, fire can be good and bad, depending on how you use it. Sex can be a positive force or a negative one, depending on how you use it. So Marshall is missing the point entirely, yet again. Now in 1971, another hit would come. One that wasn't his fault at all, but one that probably shattered what little sense he had left. His father had passed away. Marshall had already been going through a lot, much of it his own doing, but this wasn't his fault. And because he and his father didn't reconcile, it hurt him even more. We don't know if there ever was a chance for reconciliation between them. Some say that no matter what Marshall had done, his father would have never accepted him again. If that's true, I could totally see how one may be given to despair. Paul told the Corinthians in his second letter to them to welcome back the person they had put under church discipline after the first letter, 2 Corinthians 2, 6-8. For such a one, this punishment by the majority is enough. So you should rather turn to forgive and comfort him, or he may be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. So I beg you to reaffirm your love for him. But if Marshall was unrepentant, the Bible says it's a different story, folks. 2 Thessalonians 3, 14-15. If anyone does not obey what we say in this letter, take note of that person and have nothing to do with him, that he may be ashamed. Do not regard him as an enemy, but warn him as a brother. 1 Corinthians 5, 11-13. But now I am writing you not to associate with anyone who claims to be a brother, but is sexually immoral or greedy, an idolater or a verbal abuser, a drunkard or a swindler. With such a man do not even eat. What business of mine is it to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those outside. Expel the wicked man from among you. All I'm saying is don't judge Marshall's father too harshly without knowing all the details. Marshall's later actions, I believe, prove he was committed to evil, no matter what. Now jobless, isolated, emotionally and financially depleted, helplessness consumed him. Sadly, suicidal thoughts crept in, and then something even more alarming began to happen. It's said that he started to hear voices. It's not uncommon for people in extreme emotional distress to experience auditory hallucinations, but spiritually speaking, it's not uncommon when involved in such depravity to hear demonic voices as well. That is precisely what I believed happened to Applewhite, because these voices would shape the rest of his life, and we know where they led. Jesus warned that the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Applewhite let him do this to him, and then became an agent to be used to steal, kill, and destroy others. He was unraveling. He was desperately searching for an escape, and all of this would lead him down a path darker than anyone could have imagined. Marshall, feeling out of options, admitted himself into a psychiatric hospital. He apparently didn't tell them about the depression or suicidal thoughts, which, by the way, these two things are not always linked to sin. Let me be very clear. Even in Marshall's case, it was a mix of tragedy and bad decisions that led him into this downward spiral. But again, he didn't list these as the reason for his admission. Marshall, who's 40 chronologically here, checked into the psychiatric hospital to be cured of his homosexuality. That's what he put on the papers. For the longest time, it was rightly seen as immoral. Strangely, in the 1970s, though, this began to shift. At that time, it was considered a mental disorder. Though I feel this to be the case with some of the transgender folks running around lately, most of them are trans trenders. They desperately want attention and validation from the world, so they play dress up. I don't think homosexuality was or is a mental disorder. It is an illicit desire. That's it. A person pursuing a sexual relationship with someone of the same sex is just as bad as the married heterosexual person pursuing sex with someone who is not their spouse. Oh, and by the way, it's the same as someone who is unmarried having sex with someone. It is an illicit desire that must be resisted. Why? Because God said so. Because he made sex and sexuality, and he gets to decide how it is used.
But they can't help who they're attracted to.
Do we accept that lame excuse with adulterers? I know married men whose flesh desires tons of women that are not their wives. Can he say,
Sorry, baby, I can't help who I'm attracted to?
and what about PDF files? I gotta be careful with what I say. I don't want to get stuff flagged. Creeps who desire children. Are we going to allow them to say the same stupid thing?
But they can't help who they're attracted to.
There are some people within the alphabet mafia that are already making those arguments. They better help who they're attracted to, or they're going to be behind bars, where they don't see that behavior very favorably. At the end of the day, my friends, we all have illicit desires that we are commanded to resist, to flee, that we might honor God. Marshall had tons of illicit desires. He was right to seek help fighting them. Sadly, he went in the wrong direction doing so. So he goes to this psychiatric hospital, and it was at this hospital that he would meet a woman who would change his life forever, but not for the better. Marshall's life took an unexpected turn when he crossed paths with the crazy 45-year-old nurse named Bonnie Lou Nettles. This meeting would change everything. Though they had come from different backgrounds, Bonnie and Marshall shared a key similarity. Both had been raised in strict Christian homes, and both seemed to run in the opposite direction of all they were ever taught. Bonnie Lou was born on August 29, 1927 in Houston, Texas, to William and Elizabeth Truesdale. Her father worked as a painter and wallpaper hanger while her mother cared for Bonnie and her 3 siblings. Tragedy struck when Bonnie was just 3 years old. Her 5-year-old sister Betty suddenly died while playing in the yard one day. This loss left a lasting impression on the whole family, though details about how it shaped Bonnie are unclear. Little is known about her early childhood, but as she grew up, Bonnie pursued a career in nursing, attending the Herman Hospital School of Professional Nursing. She graduated in 1948 as an RN, and just a year after that, she married a man named Joseph Nettles. Joseph was an interesting figure. He had joined the Navy at only 15. As he got older, he became an engineer that pursued other entrepreneurial endeavors. Together, they had 4 kids, Terry, Joe, Robin, and Rosalind. For many years, Bonnie lived what seemed to be an ordinary life, working as an RN, raising her kids, and tending to her normal responsibilities. But beneath the surface, she was restless. Bonnie was drawn to ideas well outside of the faith she had been raised in. So open-minded, some would argue her brain fell out. Bonnie said goodbye to the church early on and immersed herself in something called the Theosophical Society. Satan had a massive target on these two. The Theosophical Society is a spiritual and philosophical movement founded in 1875 by Helena Petrova Blavatsky, Henry Steele Olcott, and William Quan Judge in New York. It seems to explore the mythical, occult, and esoteric aspects of religion, philosophy, and science, drawing heavily from Eastern religions, Gnosticism, and various occult traditions. You came for the UFO cult and didn't realize how quick and obvious Satan would pop up, did you? Look, this group will eventually get an episode all on their own. Theosophy teaches that hidden wisdom, or theosophia, is preserved by enlightened beings that are called ascended masters or Mahatmas. These are their so-called spiritual guides who communicate with advanced initiates. Helena Blavatsky claimed to receive teachings from said masters, particularly Moira and Kut Humi, who were supposedly ancient Tibetan adepts. Theosophy rips off other religions, namely Hinduism and Buddhism. They teach that the soul reincarnates in a cycle of spiritual evolution. And of course, this demonic evolution revolves around karma. Karma determines one's experiences in future lives, similar to Eastern thought. For them, God is not a personal deity, but a universal, impersonal force that permeates everything, blah, 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 Jedi, blah. Humanity is ever evolving towards spiritual enlightenment, and those who attain high levels of knowledge become masters or adepts and look for their lightsaber. Theosophy denies the unique divinity of Christ. Instead, they treat Jesus as just one of many enlightened teachers. And get this, they see Satan as a misunderstood symbol, not an actual being, and often reinterpret biblical events in an occult framework. It's warped, folks. Satan is the founder of the Theosophical Society. It's incredibly demonic, and Bonnie loved it. She was captivated by their teachings on reincarnation, karma, and spiritual enlightenment, and before long, she was knee-deep into the occult and all these other demonic activities. She had joined the dark side. She had become obsessed with astrology, frequently reading birth charts to interpret cosmic alignments. She participated in seances, because of course she did, convinced she could communicate with the spirits. I told you all this would tie into the dancing toaster. We've said, biblically speaking, these things are real. They knock on a real door, and the practitioner has no say over what answers that door. At one point, Bonnie even claimed to have been in contact with the spirit of a long-dead monk. No, Bonnie, if you talked to anyone with your necromancy, it wasn't your monk buddy, it was a fallen angel or the disembodied spirit of a dead Nephilim. I hope you're starting to see that speaking with dead monks will eventually lead to speaking to other beings. I'm saying the same thing answers the call on both lines. Bonnie was deeply confused, deeply deceived, and communicating with evil spirits. Bonnie's eldest daughter, Terry, later recalled that her mother always felt like she didn't quite fit in. She believed she was different, that she belonged somewhere beyond the ordinary world. To some degree, I sympathize with her in this regard, having never really fit in anywhere I've been. Heck, even people within my own denomination in Washington say I don't have a real church and exclude me from things. I get it. It's tough. I also sympathize with her because, in a way, we all have this feeling like something is off. My friends, that's because it is. Our perfect God created a good world, and ever since we introduced sin and rebellion, everything has gotten increasingly worse. For the Christian, we know we are pilgrims passing through. Listen to the Apostle Peter, 1 Peter 2:11. Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. And the Apostle Paul said this, Philippians 3:18-21. For many of whom I have often told you and now tell you, even with tears, walk as enemies of the cross of Christ. Their end is destruction, their God is their belly, and they glory in their shame with minds set on earthly things. But our citizenship is in heaven, and from it we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, who will transform our lowly body to be like His glorious body by the power that enables Him even to subject all things to Himself. Some of the feelings that Marshall and Bonnie wrestled with weren't evil in and of themselves, but both of them refused to go to the real Jesus, the Jesus of the Scriptures, the God of heaven and earth, for answers. Eventually, they'd become so corrupt and deluded, they would call themselves Christ figures. Terry would also recall nights when she and Bonnie would stand outside for hours gazing up at the sky in search of something. They weren't just curious about UFOs, they wanted to be taken. They would stare at the stars and say, "What if one of those ships stopped and picked us up?" Again, she's not the only one to feel that the world isn't right and that she didn't quite fit in upon it. Sadly, she turns to spirits and aliens instead of the Christ. Between the seances and the standing outside for hours night after night, hoping for an abduction, she was looking for love in all the wrong places. Whether it was her bloated self-confidence or budding narcissism, Bonnie believed that fate had something extraordinary in store for her. Unfortunately, throughout her life, multiple fortune tellers allegedly told her the same thing. This was a woman knocking on every evil demonic door she could. It's no surprise they all seemed to fly open the day she would meet a tall, pale, light-haired man with bulging eyes who would join her in her dark destiny. It's said that when she met Marshall Applewhite, she immediately knew. She was convinced that this was him. Keep in mind they met in a psychiatric hospital. I feel major Joker and Harley Quinn vibes here. Joker, of course a Batman villain, was a patient in Arkham Asylum, and Harleen Quinzel was a doctor, and we know they got into all kinds of deadly fictional shenanigans. Well, this Joker, Marshall, and Bonnie Quinzel would bring real death and destruction. While in the psychiatric hospital, she asked for his birth certificate so she could chart his astrological profile. Bonnie's theosophical insanity began to bleed out as she told Marshall she was certain they had known each other in a past life, that their souls were intertwined, bound together by a higher purpose. She'd go on to read his palms, studied his stars, and assured him that their meeting was not a coincidence. It was cosmic destiny. It was cosmic design. I told you I refused to blame Marshall's parents for his dark path. I definitely could see a sound argument made that Marshall may have never become this creepy cult leader if he didn't meet this witch under psychiatric care. Think about it from his perspective. In Marshall's fragile state, lost in the wreckage of all his personal failures, I'm sure he clung to her every word. He's feeling like his life was over. She's telling him everything in life so far was leading up to this moment, and that they would do great things. Bonnie sadly gave him something he didn't have anymore. purpose. That's a powerful reminder for us as we try to reach people and serve people in Christ. Now that was it. From that moment on, Bonnie and Marshall became inseparable. They believed they weren't just friends, partners, but spiritual counterparts. This was what Marshall had shared with his previous fling. This is what he wanted, a platonic soulmate. They agreed to abandon all earthly desires, including sexuality, to remain spiritually untainted. Unless God has given you the gift of celibacy, this is always a bad idea, folks. The Bible in 1 Corinthians 7 makes it clear that if you have those passions, you need to marry. We already know Marshall has a lot of lust. This won't end well. Side note, this is another thing that I think is awful about the Roman Catholic Church forbidding its priests to marry and convincing women to go to nunneries. Check out what the Bible says about forbidding marriage, 1 Timothy 4, 1-3. Now the Spirit expressly says that in latter times some will depart from the faith by devoting themselves to deceitful spirits and teachings of demons. Oh, that's Marshall and Bonnie. Through the insincerity of liars whose consciences are seared, who forbid marriage and require abstinence from foods that God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. This most certainly applies to most of the creepy cults we're going to cover. There's always a warped approach to sex and sexuality in these groups. What's really funny is how many of them forbid sex and marriage with anyone but the leader. To their credit, Marshall and Bonnie didn't do this, but trust me, they had plenty of rules for thee and not for me that we'll get into. Catholic apologists will say,
It's not forced, it's a choice.
but it's not. They're saying if you want to serve God in this capacity, you are forced not to partake in one of the greatest gifts God has ever given. And if you knew the stats on the sexual impropriety that occurs within the priesthood and within those nunneries, you wouldn't sleep at night. Anyways, Marshall and Bonnie were about to leave everything behind to set out on this new path they felt destined to take. New Year's Day, 1973, they walk away from their old lives and set out on a demonic journey together. There was still one major complication. Bonnie was still married. When she told her husband Joseph, he was devastated. He was totally blindsided. Their marriage had never been troubled in his eyes. They had 4 children, careers, a home. They had a whole life together. Prior to this moment, Bonnie had never given any indication that she was unhappy. And now, she was bouncing on him. Not for a lover, not for another man, but for some abstract, mystical mission she couldn't even explain to him fully. Joseph no doubt had a hard time believing this nonsense as she was leaving with a man she met in a psychiatric hospital. He tried to make sense of it all, but how do you reason with someone so irrational? He seemed to come around to the fact that it wasn't an affair, but that didn't really make things better. If it had been an affair, he might have understood. It would have been painful, but at least it would have been grounded in reality. But this was nuts. How do you rationalize with your wife abandoning everything, her husband, her children, her entire life, because she believes the universe has chosen her for something greater? There was seemingly no stopping her. Bonnie left, and Joseph was sadly forced to accept it. As much as I hate divorce, he came out on top of this one, folks, believe me. Eventually, he remarried and moved on and built a new life. But for their children, the pain of her departure never fully faded. Bonnie straight abandoned them for most of their lives, and she erased herself entirely. This is when the cult as we know it will begin to take shape. Bonnie and Marshall set off on what began as a simple road trip. If things were weird so far, the crazy train hadn't even left the station. One night, as they camped beneath the stars, they experienced what they believed was a divine revelation. In that moment, they became convinced that they were no ordinary travelers. They became convinced they were the 2 witnesses foretold in the book of Revelation, prophets chosen by God to prepare humanity for a great transformation. I'm going to say this a little rough, but cults love bastardizing the book of Revelation. For those bothered by that word, it simply means to corrupt, debase, or distort something from its original form, and they most certainly would do this. If you know anything about cults, you know that the book of Revelation is a place they love to manipulate. Why is this? I'm going to say some more things that may make some uncomfortable, others won't be surprised. Revelation is one of the most difficult books of the Bible to understand and interpret. It's packed with surreal imagery, beasts, dragons, plagues, horsemen, and a battle between good and evil. Since it's already open to multiple interpretations, cult leaders can easily cherry-pick verses and create their own doomsday narrative without being easily refuted. Cults thrive on fear, ambiguity, and a sense of urgency. Revelation describes end-of-the-world catastrophes, divine judgment, and the rise of an Antichrist figure, which are all perfect tools to keep followers in a state of anxiety and dependence upon the group and upon their leader. If you convince people that the world is ending soon, you can get them to do almost anything, including cutting off their family, giving up their money, or even dying for the cause. Revelation talks about the righteous few being saved and the wicked masses being destroyed. Revelation 7 is a really popular place for cults to use and abuse. The reference to the 144,000 is a key spot we'll talk a lot about on this show. Cult leaders and their followers love this kind of exclusivity. Think about the sense of purpose that's derived from sentiments like, "We are God's chosen people and everyone else is blind. If you leave the group, you'll be damned, punished, or left behind." Obsession with eschatology keeps people paranoid, and paranoia keeps followers isolated, which is a classic cult tactic. A common trick cult leaders use is claiming that Revelation prophecies are unfolding in real time and that they alone have been given divine insight to decode them, or that they are being talked about within them as well. Every war, disaster, pandemic, or economic crisis can be framed as a sign of the end. The Jehovah's Witnesses predicted the end multiple times. The Branch Davidians under David Koresh believed he was unlocking new Revelation prophecies. Heaven's Gate had their 2 witnesses claiming they had shed their earthly bodies to escape the coming apocalypse. Every time the world doesn't end, cult leaders just move the goalpost, claim a spiritual fulfillment instead, or blame their followers for not being faithful enough. The sad bottom line is Revelation is the perfect cult manipulation tool in the wrong hands. It's cryptic, dramatic, and terrifying, which makes it easy to twist into whatever narrative a cult or cult leader needs. But at its core, Revelation isn't about fear or secret knowledge. At the beginning of the book, it declares that it's about Christ's victory over evil. It is the revelation of Jesus Christ, who is the hope of the world. Cults distort it because fear keeps people obedient and mystery makes them dependent upon a leader's interpretation. It's a brilliantly evil strategy, and it's worked for a really, really long time. Now, how can we protect ourselves? Well, know Scripture for yourself first and foremost. You should know the truth, and the truth shall set you free and keep you free, friends. If someone claims to have a new revelation or secret knowledge, that's one of the biggest red flags there is. Claiming to be the two was only the beginning. They latched onto the idea of recycling. That's a term they believe described both the destruction of the earth and the opportunity for spiritual renewal. To them, the end of the world wasn't something to be feared. It was an invitation to transcend. But not everyone would be able to escape. Only those who followed them and shed their earthly identities, who detached from their humanity, would be worthy of what they called the graduation, a process they claimed would allow them to leave their physical bodies behind and ascend a higher plane of existence. In their minds, this wasn't death, it was liberation, early seeds of destruction being sown. If they proved themselves faithful, a spacecraft would arrive to transport them and their followers to the next level. This was a realm beyond human comprehension, which they equated with the true kingdom of heaven. They now had a mission, to seek out others who were ready, those willing to abandon their families, their lives, and their identities to embark on the journey. The two began spreading their teachings in hopes of gathering followers. To do this, they put their ideology into a pamphlet, a recruitment tool designed to attract those searching before social media was a thing. Their claims, outlandish, apocalyptic, unshakably demonic. According to their writings, get this, Jesus Christ had already returned, but not as a divine figure descending from the heavens upon the clouds. No, instead he had come back as a creepy, bug-eyed man from Texas. And who was this man, you ask? Marshall Applewhite himself, of course. But Bonnie and Marshall had their own unique spin on prophecy. They claimed that they would die, return to life, and ascend, not to heaven, but into an alien spacecraft, proving to the world that their message was true. They called this event the demonstration. It was supposed to be an ultimate spectacle of faith, an undeniable sign that they were the true messengers from a higher realm. But before the demonstration could happen, Marshall ran into a very earthly problem. He got arrested. What was his crime? Failing to return a rental car. You can't make this stuff up. In a twist that almost sounds scripted, the car that he had been driving for months was a Mercury Comet, a kind of cosmic irony. Again, you just can't make up. For nearly 9 months, Bonnie and Marshall had been living out of this rental car, traveling and preaching their demonic filth. When the authorities finally caught up to Marshall, he was completely unfazed, offering an explanation that only he could consider logical.
God permitted me to use this car, and I am not subject to human laws.
Of course you're not. Now just imagine someone pulling that defense in a modern courtroom.
Your Honor, divine authority supersedes rental agreements.
Yeah, that's gonna work out real well. Marshall was sentenced to 6 months in jail, while Bonnie, still dedicated to the cause, returned to nursing while waiting for his release. When his time was finally served, Marshall walked free, more determined than ever. This minor legal setback wasn't going to prevent their destinies. Once Marshall was released from jail, he and Bonnie picked up right where they left off. Their mission wasn't just continuing, it was now escalating. Their beliefs were becoming more elaborate, even more detached from reality, and more intertwined with their identities. Bonnie even cut her hair to match Marshall's, further cementing the idea that they weren't just partners in this. They were two halves of the same whole, the same entity. Some have speculated that they must have been using psychedelics given the increasingly bizarre nature of their ideology, though surprisingly, there's no evidence for this. Heaven's Gate would actually ban the use of drugs, especially psychedelic ones. The textbook psychological explanation for Marshall and Bonnie's behavior is folie à deux, French for madness of two. This is a rare psychiatric phenomenon where a delusional belief originates in one person, the primary, who already suffers from a severe mental disorder. Over time, their delusions are transferred to a second person, the secondary, who, under normal circumstances, would not have developed the same belief system. The secondary becomes so emotionally and psychologically dependent on the primary that they adopt the delusions as their own, often abandoning logic and reason in the process. Again, I'm not the only one to have made the Joker and Harley Quinn connection, folks. One person's madness infects the other until they're both living in a fabricated reality that makes sense to no one but them. This uncomfortably fits Bonnie and Marshall, Bonnie being the primary that helped nudge Marshall into madness and depravity. But I reject the notion that it's all purely psychological, as I think I've made clear. Bonnie didn't lose it because she had mental problems. I believe Bonnie suffered from a demonic madness brought about by her delving into the occult in every possible way she could. She was Satan's primary vessel that pushed Marshall, the secondary, into thinking he was Jesus. Each reinforced the other's satanic beliefs. No doubt, no hesitation, no questioning. And all of this was coming at the worst time or the best time for them. From the 1950s to the 1970s, belief in UFOs, extraterrestrial contact, and government cover-ups was at an all-time high. Hollywood was churning out science fiction films about alien invasions and intergalactic civilizations. Reports of UFO sightings were becoming so common that the U.S. government launched investigations like Project Blue Book to study them. People weren't just casually interested, they were becoming obsessed. This was also a time of deep societal unrest, as we noted before. With the Vietnam War, the Cold War, economic uncertainty, people were feeling lost, they were feeling anxious, they were searching for meaning. Some turned to the truth for guidance, no doubt. Sadly, many others turned to New Age spirituality for answers. These would be the ones who would later join Heaven's Gate and become convinced that salvation was in the stars. So while Bonnie and Marshall may have sounded insane to some, they were tapping into a real cultural movement, one that already had believers primed and ready to follow. Bonnie and Marshall had their message, but they needed to increase their audience. Starting in Texas, where both of them were from, they began plastering flyers across multiple states, concentrating on college campuses, community centers, spiritual gatherings, and even churches, places where seekers of higher truths may be found. The wording on the flyers was cryptic, yet intriguing. If you have ever entertained the idea that there might be a real, physical level in space beyond the confines of Earth, you will want to attend this meeting. To the average person, it may have seemed like an obscure sci-fi discussion group, but to those already searching for something more, it was an invitation to enlightenment. In September of 1975, one of their first major recruitment events took place in Waldport, Oregon, because of course it was on the West Coast. The response was overwhelming. More than 200 people gathered, drawn in by curiosity and the mystery surrounding Bonnie and Marshall's claims. When they finally took the stage, they weren't erratic street preachers or charismatic gurus. They were shockingly calm, composed and deliberate, their tone serious, almost military-like, otherworldly. They claimed that they were not from this world, not in the way most people thought. They were advanced beings from a higher realm trapped in human bodies. They had been sent to Earth on a mission to recruit a select group of individuals, a chosen few who would undergo a transformation and leave the Earth behind. The destination? a spacecraft waiting to take them to the next level. To emphasize the scientific nature of their so-called experiment, they even assigned themselves code names, the first of many creepy nicknames they would adopt throughout the life of the cult. Bonnie became Guinea, Marshall became Pig. Yeah, again, you can't make this stuff up. The names were meant to signify that they themselves were part of the experiment, and those who followed them would be joining in a cosmic test. What book did they twist further in order to support their psychotic claims? Well, the Bible, of course. They were further twisting the Bible to fit their demonic vision. To make their claims more palatable to those with religious backgrounds, Bonnie and Marshall continued to reinterpret the scriptures, especially passages about the second coming of Christ. According to them, Jesus' ascension into heaven, it wasn't a divine act. It was him being taken aboard a spacecraft. A lot of these demonic ideas have made their way into other belief systems, by the way, and rebranded into popular culture. They also said the clouds of heaven in prophecy were not actual clouds, but UFOs arriving to collect the faithful. This is the same ridiculous thinking that you see from Ancient Aliens on History Channel. And remember, the book of Revelation was not about the end of the world, but about the recycling of humanity where only the enlightened few would be saved. To most, these ideas would have sounded outrageous, but to the people in that room, searching for answers, it was revolutionary. By the end of the meeting, roughly 20 people made a decision that would change their lives forever. They abandoned their jobs, their homes, and their families, not out of fear, but out of an unshakable belief that they had been chosen. And these weren't just drifters or dreamers. Many of them were professionals, parents, people with promising futures, but empowered by hell itself. Bonnie and Marshall convinced them that there was something greater waiting for them all. The cult had its first true followers, and this was just the beginning. And my friends, that is only part 1 of our deep dive into Heaven's Gate. I wasn't going to split it up, but once I got 35 pages into my first script on the group, I realized we're going to need some more time with this. I don't want to rush it. And again, I'm not going anywhere, and I hope you're not either. Next week, we'll continue our discussion on history's most infamous UFO cult. I hope that you learned something you didn't know about the cult. I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for your love and support that makes the Dancing Toaster and the Man-Eating Toaster possible. Not sure where you're listening to this, whether through Patreon or through Spotify. I've had some difficulties getting the exclusive stuff up on Apple, and I hope it's finally working through Spotify. When you search The Dancing Toaster on Spotify, I know one comes up with The Dancing Toaster Podcast, and now there's another one that says Pastor Nelly. For those not signed up, it shows a lock symbol over the play button. Hit me up in Patreon, direct message me, or use the community tab. Let me know where you're checking out the content. I'm trying to see if the Spotify stuff is finally cooperating. Please share and tell others about the show, both shows. I'm hoping we can get some FOMO generated so the Patreon can grow, but only do it if you feel that this additional content was entertaining and worthwhile. Once we get a few episodes under our belts, I'm going to release one for the masses so they can hear what they're missing out on, bait the hook, so to speak. I want to thank you again. I will see you Tuesday on the Dancing Toaster, and I'll see you next Thursday. Get ready for part 2 of our deep dive into Heaven's Gate. I'm so excited about the Man-Eating Toaster. As I always say on the main show, don't consume toasters, but don't let any toasters or cult leaders consume you. I love you. I'm out.
Report suspicious activities and call 911 for immediate response. Expect delay.
Nobody else will be taken from the south. Stand by. Flight 022. Maintain approach. You're clear for movement.
Expect traffic delay and restrictions. Take personal security precautions to avoid becoming a victim of an attack. Avoid crowded public areas and gatherings. Not travel in areas affected by the attack or in a known area of elevated virus activity. Keep emergency supplies accessible and a full tank of gas at all times.
Be careful.
Government officials